Darkness, it never truly begins, and it never truly ends. It simply waits. And somewhere within that endless void, something moves slow, heavy, and ancient. You don't hear it at first. You feel it, like the weight of a sickness you didn't know was growing inside you. Like the breath of a plague carried on a wind that should not exist. That presence is Typhus. Before you see him, the light fades. Before you hear him, hope dies. The void around him shivers with a billion unseen wings, microscopic demons hidden in his armor, crawling beneath his rotting skin, whispering promises of decay. He does not rush. He does not roar. He simply approaches, steadily. Like a disease that knows you cannot escape it, there are champions of chaos who hunger for glory, warlords who scream the names of their dark gods, who burn worlds in ecstasy or rage. But Typhus is different. His terror is silent. It is patient. It settles into your bones, into your breath, into the very air around you. He is the kind of nightmare that does not kill quickly. He unravels you piece by piece, until even death becomes a mercy you are no longer allowed. This is the story of a man who was once a soldier of honor, a first captain, respected by an entire legion. A man who fought beside a primarch, only to one day betray him. Not for glory, not for power, but for something far more horrifying. A promise made in the shadows, whispered by the god of rot himself. In this journey, we will walk through every corner of Typhus's existence. We will uncover how Typhon became the herald of Nurgle. We will explore the seeds of corruption planted long before the heresy ever began. We will witness the betrayal that doomed the Death Guard. We will see the moment he embraced the plague that reshaped his flesh and birthed the Destroyer Hive inside his body, a living swarm of demonic infection that devours entire armies. And by the end, you will understand why Typhus is not simply a villain, not just a monster, but one of the most terrifying beings to ever walk the galaxy of Warhammer. A being whose footsteps mark the slow death of civilizations. A creature who does not conquer with fire or thunder, but with the cold, unstoppable certainty of decay itself. This is the tale of Typhus. And it begins, as all plagues do, quietly. The Death Guard were not born in glory. They were not sculpted for brilliance or beauty. They came from a world where the air itself was poison, where every breath was a battle, and where survival was earned through suffering so deep it carved itself into the soul. To understand Typhus, you must first understand the legion that shaped him, a legion built on endurance, silence, and a kind of strength no other warriors could even comprehend, long before the Horus heresy shattered the galaxy. The Death Guard marched beneath the pale and terrifying shadow of their primarch, Mortarion. He was not a shining figure of hope like Sanguinius, nor a godlike tactician like Guilliman. Mortarion was a ghost wrapped in rusted armor, a survivor of a world that hated life. Barbarus, his homeworld, was a nightmare, choking fog, toxic winds, monstrous warlords ruling from mountains shrouded in deadly mists. Mortarion grew up breathing poison, learning to resist death from the moment he could walk. And when the Emperor found him, the scars of that world remained etched into everything he was. Those scars became the foundation of the Death Guard. Mortarion raised his sons to embrace suffering, to never retreat, to never complain, and to never allow weakness to define them. Where other legions polished their armor until it gleamed, the Death Guard wore dull green plates scarred with corrosion. Where others relied on speed or strategy, the Death Guard advanced through artillery fire and chemical storms, never breaking formation. They were the legion that did not stop, did not fear, did not fall. In their hearts, survival itself was a weapon. Everything about them reflected Mortarion's philosophy. Pain was teaching. Poison was endurance. Hardship was the only truth the galaxy could be trusted to deliver consistently. And among these grim warriors, one man stood above the rest, Typhon, before he became Typhus. Before the rot set into his soul. He was the first captain of the Death Guard, and in those early years he was admired. Feared, yes, but respected even more. Typhon moved through the ranks with a quiet, relentless determination that mirrored Mortarion's own nature. He had an authority that didn't need to be shouted, a presence that made even hardened Astartes stand straighter when he entered a chamber. He was the blade Mortarion trusted most, the commander who could take a mission wrapped in death and return victorious no matter the odds. On the battlefield, Typhon was a storm contained inside armor. He fought without hesitation, without fear, and without mercy. Toxic environments that crippled other space marines barely slowed him. Some said he marched through gas clouds so deadly they melted skin from bone, and yet the captain emerged unscathed, as though the poisons welcomed him. Even then, even before the truth was known, there were whispers. Rumors that Typhon's resistance to sickness was unnatural, that something watched him from behind the veil. But in those days, they were only rumors. None dared voice them aloud. Mortarion valued many things: loyalty, discipline, and the ability to endure what would kill others. Typhon embodied all three in a way that even Mortarion could not ignore. And so, the first captain grew in influence. He commanded entire companies of warriors. He planned campaigns that choked Xeno's worlds in toxic death. He was the one trusted to deliver Mortarion's iron will wherever the Primarch himself could not be, but beneath that iron devotion, something else lived inside Typhon, an ambition wound tight like a serpent waiting to strike. Where Mortarion had learned to hate the monsters of Barbarus and the toxins they wielded, Typhon had learned to understand them. He did not merely endure poison. He felt at home in it. It whispered to him in ways it whispered to no other. Darkness recognized him. Sickness bowed to him. And deep in the warp, something ancient, something bloated with decay and joy, looked upon Typhon with affection. Still, none of that was visible to the Legion. Not yet. To his brothers, Typhon was the perfect soldier. He never spoke of glory, never chased recognition. He simply stood there, calm as a corpse, unbreakable as rusted iron. And the Death Guard followed him because they believed he was one of them, a warrior shaped by Mortarion's teachings. In truth, Typhon was shaped by something far older. During the Great Crusade, when humanity's armies spread across the stars, the Death Guard became known as the hammer that could not be stopped. Toxic swamps, plague-ridden jungles, irradiated deserts, these were the battlefields they claimed as their domain. And at the forefront of this relentless advance, standing shoulder to shoulder with Mortarion, was Typhon. His voice, deep and steady, carried orders that cut through the hellish storms like a blade. His warriors obeyed without question. They admired his resilience, envied his calm, and trusted him with their lives. None of them suspected that their greatest champion was already drifting toward a fate darker than anything they could imagine. For now, the Legion saw only a commander, a leader carved in stone, a man who could walk into a plague-ravaged battlefield where millions had died and emerge untouched, a man who did not fear corruption, because corruption had always been a part of him. Typhon stood at the center of the Death Guard's strength, the living symbol of endurance, discipline, and the brutal resilience that defined Mortarion's sons. But every strength can hide a weakness. Every leader can hide a secret. And every legend can hide a monster waiting to be born. Barbarus was not a world for the living. It was a world that hunted the living. Thick, choking fog covered everything, so toxic that a single breath could rot a normal human's lungs from the inside. The land crawled with mutated beasts, creatures swollen with disease and corruption, their bones twisted, their skin oozing foul pus. And above the poisonous mists on the jagged mountain peaks, ruled the so-called overlords, monstrous. Inhuman tyrants who fed on human misery like parasites feasting on a dying host. It was here, in this nightmare, that Typhon was born. He came into the world gasping for air that should have killed him. But it didn't. The poison seemed to bend around him, almost as if the fog itself recognized him. Even as a child, Typhon walked longer and survived deeper into the toxic swamps than any other human could dream of. Villagers whispered that he was favored by the mists, though no one dared say by whom. Children feared him. Adults avoided him. Even the monsters stalking the lower valleys kept their distance when he approached, as if sensing something. Typhon felt the world differently. At night, when the fog thickened and the sky turned the color of dead flesh, he would hear whispers, soft, warm, comforting. They didn't frighten him. They made him feel less alone. These whispers told him secrets where predators hid. When a plague would sweep through a village, which paths through the swamps were the least deadly. Sometimes he felt as if the land itself was guiding him, nurturing him, preparing him for something greater. These were his first signs of being a psyker. Though he didn't know the word yet, Kala's abilities grew stronger with age. He sensed emotions before people spoke. He could feel sickness before symptoms appeared. On rare nights when fever dreams gripped him, he swore he could see the spirits inside the fog, countless little shapes drifting like dust motes, giggling quietly as they brushed against his skin. As he grew older, he stopped fearing these moments. He welcomed them. They made him feel powerful, special, chosen. But Barbarus had another figure who walked the poisoned lands. Mortarion. The future, Primarch wandered the toxic valleys in defiance of the overlords who ruled the peaks. He challenged their tyranny, saving villages one gasping breath at a time. To the common people, Mortarion was a ghost of vengeance, tall, armored in scrap metal, his eyes burning with hatred for the monsters who had hunted humanity for centuries. When Mortarion found Typhon, the boy was on the verge of adulthood, tall, strong, and frighteningly calm for someone raised in hell. Mortarion sensed something in him immediately. A darkness, a talent, a reflection of himself. Perhaps all of it. Typhon, on the other hand, looked at Mortarion with a mixture of awe and quiet resentment. Mortarion was the hero of the people, the liberator, the warrior who defied the overlords, the symbol of everything humanity could rise to become. Typhon respected him. But a shadow lived behind that respect, a whisper that said, "He is powerful, but not the strongest. He leads, but you were born for more. He endures the poison. You thrive in it." Mortarion trained him, shaped him, raised him into a weapon meant to help free Barbarus. But Typhon was never like the others Mortarion saved. Where they saw hope, he saw opportunity. Where they saw liberation, he saw destiny. Mortarion dreamed of killing the overlords to save Barbarus. Typhon dreamed of surpassing them entirely, of becoming a figure whose power would eclipse even the toxic rulers of the mountains. And deep in the fog, something watched. The same presence that whispered to Typhon in childhood grew stronger as he grew older. It soothed his anger when Mortarion scolded him. It fed his ambition when Mortarion gave command to someone else. It fanned jealousy every time Mortarion took another apprentice under his wing. Mortarion believed in equality among the people he rescued, but Typhon wanted more than equality. He wanted recognition, purpose, destiny. He began to feel that Mortarion, for all his strength, couldn't give him what he needed. The mysterious voice, warm, patient, fatherly, felt closer than any mentor or friend. When Typhon lay half asleep in the poisonous fog, he felt arms around him, gentle and reassuring. When he was sick with fever, he felt soft laughter in his dreams. When the world felt unbearable, the whisper promised, "You are not alone, my child. You are mine. And I will make you strong." These whispers were not the overlords. They were far older, far kinder, Far more horrifying, long before he ever met the Emperor, long before the Death Guard were even born. Typhon was already claimed. Mortarion had found a warrior. Nurgle had found a son, but Mortarion never noticed the truth. He saw only a talented, hardened young man who shared his resistance to poison. He never questioned why and Typhon kept his secret close, nurturing it, feeding it, listening to it in the silent hours when Mortarion slept and the fog pressed against the world like a damp shroud. Jealousy, ambition, corruption, not sudden, not violent, but slow, patient, inevitable. Like decay. Typhon grew beside Mortarion as an ally, a student, almost a brother. But inside him, something else grew as well, a bond far more intimate than loyalty, far more permanent than pride. A bond to a god waiting in the shadow of every sickness, smiling gently through every breath of poisoned air. Nurgle had already placed his hand on Typhon's soul, and one day, that hidden bond would decide the fate of the entire Death Guard. As the Great Crusade expanded, so did Typhon's influence. Many in the Legion looked to him as the true embodiment of their values, unyielding, stoic, unbreakable. Mortarion was their primarch, their father. But Typhon was their example, their standard, their perfection. He trained new recruits personally, molding them with the same philosophy Barbarus had carved into him. Pain as a teacher, poison as a test. Survival is victory. But beneath all this loyalty, beneath all the discipline and endurance, something vile pulsed in Typhon's soul. A secret corruption growing like fungi beneath steel. The whispers from the warp did not fade, they intensified. They praised him when he killed. They guided him when he planned. They caressed him when he meditated alone in the dark. And slowly, what had once been faint hints became open communion. During a campaign in a plague-ridden system, Typhon fell into a trance after a brutal victory. Some claimed he was injured. Others believed he was exhausted. But the truth was far stranger. In that trance, he saw a garden vast, grotesque, filled with life that should not exist. Fat insects buzzed through humid air. Swollen fruit dripped rot onto soil that pulsed like flesh. And in the center sat a massive figure laughing warm, loving in a way that felt terrifyingly familiar. Nurgle welcomed him home. When Typhon awakened, his eyes were different, calmer, older, filled with a patient hunger. He told no one of what he had seen. But from that day onward, he fought with a purpose beyond victory, beyond loyalty, beyond even Mortarion. He fought to serve the one who had claimed him long before the Emperor had ever walked the stars. Typhon began recruiting silently small groups within the Death Guard whose minds he could bend with promises of strength, endurance, and release from the Emperor's lies. Some came willingly, some without realizing they had joined him. His network spread like mold behind walls hidden but everywhere. And Mortarion, blinded by his hatred for psychers and his obsession with defeating the Emperor, did not see the rot festering beneath his command structure. He trusted Typhon. That was his greatest mistake. Typhon's victories continued. His influence expanded. His mistrust of the Emperor became open disdain. And the corruption inside him, fed by Nurgle's affection, turned into devotion. By the time the Horus heresy began, Typhon was no longer simply a captain. He was a vessel, a disciple, a chosen son of decay, and the Legion did not know it yet. But their doom was already walking beside them. Typhon's rise within the Death Guard did not happen in a burst of glory. It grew slowly, steadily, like mold spreading beneath armor plates, silent yet unstoppable. From the moment he was accepted into the Legion, his path was different. While others struggled to adapt to the bitter doctrines of Mortarion, Typhon embraced them as if he had been born for this life. Poison? He breathed it like air. Suffering? He welcomed it as an old friend. Endurance? It was the only language he had ever spoken. The Great Crusade became the stage where Typhon's legend began to unfold. Campaign after campaign, the Death Guard were thrown into the worst hellholes the Imperium could find, planets saturated with radiation, worlds drowning in plague, moons where the atmosphere itself ate through ceramite. And where lesser Astartes faltered, Typhon thrived. Entire battalions followed him into noxious swamps where the air shimmered with toxins, and when the fog cleared, only the Death Guard still stood. Every victory he won tightened his grip on the Legion, not through speeches or pride, but through quiet certainty. Warriors don't argue with the one who always returns alive. There were campaigns where even Mortarion hesitated to deploy his sons, knowing the death toll would be catastrophic. Yet Typhon volunteered. He led the first company through chemical storms that stripped flesh from bone, fought enemies who weaponized diseases unknown to the Imperium, and confronted xenospecies whose breath alone could kill a human in seconds. But Typhon never slowed. Poison ran off his armor like harmless mist. Plagues clung to his skin as though recognizing a kindred spirit. His enemies fell, not always by blade or bolter, but by coughing, rotting, collapsing without understanding what had touched them. And with every victory, the whispers that had followed him since childhood grew louder. It was during these years that the darkness inside Typhon deepened. The more he fought, the more he endured, the more he realized he belonged not to the gleaming empire of humanity, but to something older, something that had nurtured him since Barbarus. He could feel it. When diseases bloomed across battlefields, he felt comfort. When the dead piled high and the air filled with rot, something inside him warmed, like a father placing a kind hand on his shoulder. But in the bright gold of imperial banners, Typhon saw only lies. The Emperor, this radiant figure Mortarion reluctantly served, disgusted him. Typhon could not understand how Mortarion, a being who had fought monsters for human freedom, could bow to another tyrant wearing prettier armor. Mortarion had always despised the witchcraft of Barbarus, hated psychers, and loathed the unnatural. Yet the Emperor himself wielded psychic power far greater than any overlord. To Typhon, it was hypocrisy of the highest order. Mistrust turned into disdain. Disdain hardened into hatred. Every time the Emperor appeared, surrounded by blinding light, Typhon felt a burning in his chest, a mixture of jealousy and contempt. Who was this golden king to command warriors shaped by suffering? Who was he to claim authority over Mortarion, over the Death Guard, over Typhon himself? Typhon saw the Emperor as an invader of destiny, a thief of the path he believed was rightfully his. And while Mortarion fought his internal battle, torn between loyalty and resentment, Typhon's path became clearer. He began to gravitate toward the darkest edges of the Legion. His commands grew harsher, his decisions more ruthless. He executed with precision, yes, but also with a strange pleasure, a calm satisfaction that unnerved even his closest brothers. They whispered that Typhon seemed to enjoy watching the enemy crumble from sickness as much as he enjoyed crushing them himself. They did not descend into madness and mutation like some of the other traitor legions. Their fall was slower, heavier, quieter, like a corpse sinking beneath swamp water. Poison had always been their weapon. Rot had always surrounded them. Endurance had always been their creed. So when the warp began to whisper through the cracks in reality, they did not resist it. They had already been living in its shadow. But Typhon guided every step. He ensured the Death Guard were deployed to war zones thick with plague, where the warp's sickness could seep into their lungs. He encouraged rituals disguised as purification rites, quietly twisting their meaning. He poisoned their hearts with hatred for the Emperor, convincing them that the Imperium had abandoned them, that Horus was their future, and that Mortarion's destiny was greater than that of any loyal son. And all the while, he hid the most terrible truth, that he had already pledged the Legion's fate to Nurgle. For Typhon's agenda was far deeper than rebellion. Chaos undivided was never enough for him. Horus sought power. Mortarion sought vengeance. But Typhon sought something older, something inevitable. The gentle, rotting embrace of the plague god. He had been chosen as Nurgle's herald long before the first shot of the heresy was fired, long before the War Master turned, long before Mortarion had ever laid eyes on the Emperor. The Death Guard believed Typhon was guiding them toward independence. Horus believed Typhon was strengthening their cause. Mortarion believed Typhon was simply obeying his primarch. None of them realized he was preparing them for a gift they could never refuse. The closer the Death Guard came to the climax of the heresy, the more Typhon's manipulations tightened around them. He convinced Mortarion to cut ties with the navigators aboard the fleet, claiming they could not trust those psychers during the warp storms raging across the galaxy. Mortarion, who despised witchcraft, agreed without hesitation. It was the biggest mistake he would ever make. With the navigators gone, Typhon quietly assumed command of the fleet's warp jump. He told Mortarion everything was under control. He lied. He steered the Death Guard directly into a region of the warp where reality dissolved into clouds of sickness and despair. The warp's embrace closed around them like a coffin. The Legion began to rot from the inside. Their organs liquefied. Their skin blistered. Their armor fused into their flesh. Their lungs collapsed under plagues that had no name. The Death Guard screamed as their bodies dissolved into living disease. And Mortarion, their primarch, strong enough to survive poisons that killed lesser Astartes in seconds, finally felt something he had never felt before. He felt helpless, desperate, dying, drowning in filth. He called out for salvation, not to the Emperor he despised, not to Horus he served, but to anyone who would save his sons. And in that moment, Nurgle answered, but not because of Mortarion, because Typhon had already prepared the offering. When the Death Guard gasped their last breaths, Typhon stood among them, not dying, but transforming. The Destroyer Hive awakened inside him, a swirling mass of demon plagues bursting through his flesh, embracing him like long-lost children. His corruption was complete. His hidden agenda came to light in the most horrifying way possible. The Death Guard had not fallen by accident. They had not been cursed by misfortune. They had not been betrayed by fate. They had been delivered by Typhon into the open, rotting hands of Nurgle. Mortarion had lost control of his legion long before the heresy ended. He just didn't realize it until it was too late. And Typhon, once the first captain, now became something far worse. Something Mortarion could no longer command. The herald of the plague god. Horus had not yet fallen when Typhon first sensed the tremors of rebellion in the War Master's heart. To most of the Imperium, Horus Lupercal was the Emperor's chosen son, the perfect general, the shining star of humanity's march across the galaxy. But to Typhon, Horus was something else entirely. He was an opportunity. Typhon watched carefully as the War Master's pride swelled, as the Emperor withdrew into his secret projects on Terra, and as resentment grew like a bruise beneath the surface of the greatest warrior ever created. Typhon did not need psychic visions to sense what was coming. He felt the pull of destiny, a familiar whisper from the warp nudging him forward. Change is coming, my child, and you will be at its center. When Horus finally felt a chaos on Davin, Typhon felt a ripple through reality itself. Something vast had shifted. The old gods were stirring. And Typhon knew this was the moment Nurgle had prepared him for. Without hesitation, he offered his allegiance to the War Master, not out of loyalty, but because Horus's rebellion was the perfect stage upon which Typhon's true purpose would finally bloom. Horus accepted him eagerly. Typhon's reputation as an indestructible leader, his mastery of warfare in hostile environments, and his quiet, unwavering presence made him invaluable. But Horus never saw the full truth. He believed Typhon joined him because Mortarion would follow. He believed he was recruiting a captain, But Typhon was something far more dangerous than a captain. He was a seed of corruption, planted decades earlier by Nurgle himself. Now that seed was ready to grow. Typhon, return to the Death Guard changed. Not outwardly, not yet. But there was something new in his voice, something colder, heavier. He began whispering to Mortarion, feeding the Primarch's bitterness toward the Emperor. Mortarion had always hated psychic power, sorcery, anything tainted by the warp, and yet the Emperor wielded those very things. Typhon used this contradiction like a knife. "Father," Typhon would say softly, when Mortarion brooded alone aboard the Endurance, "you hate the Emperor's hypocrisy. You despise his secrecy. You know he is no better than the monsters of Barbarus." Mortarion would not meet his gaze, but Typhon saw the tension in his jaw. The old wound was still fresh. Typhon continued, careful, steady, patient. "The Emperor manipulates us all. But Horus fights for the truth you were denied." Mortarion, despite his immense power, was painfully susceptible to emotional wounds. He had never overcome the betrayal he felt when the Emperor arrived on Barbarus and stole his final victory. Typhon pressed that pain like a skilled torturer probing a scar. Slowly, Mortarion shifted. Slowly, the Death Guard followed. The warp is not a place of storms. It is the storm. A sea of emotion, madness, and living corruption that twists around itself, always shifting, always hungry. When the Death Guard fleet entered it under Typhon's command, they stepped not into a passage, but into a trap woven long before the first engine roared to life. Typhon had planned this moment for decades, from the day Nurgle whispered to him in the poisoned fog of Barbarus. And now, as the fleet drifted deeper into the roiling nightmare of unreality, his plan was finally ready to bloom. The warp storm closed behind them like a monstrous jaw snapping shut. Engines sputtered, alarms screamed, and even the veteran Astartes warriors who feared nothing felt a chill press against their souls. Mortarion demanded answers, but Typhon stood calmly at the command throne, his voice steady, almost serene. He told them it was only a disturbance, that their route would soon stabilize. His lies were perfect, delivered with the same calm certainty that had earned him the trust of an entire legion. But something else was happening beneath the surface. The ship groaned. Not from mechanical strain, but from something entering. A presence began to seep through the walls, through the vents, through the air itself. A rotten, warm smell like sweet decay filled the corridors. Marines began coughing without understanding why. Their breath fogged in front of them, not from cold, but from contamination. And deep in the bowels of the Endurance, where the shadows grew thick and the air turned heavy, something answered Typhon's silent invitation. A demon, not a shrieking monstrosity of flame and teeth. No, this was a gentle, bubbling, whispering horror. A creature born of filth and affection, of sickness and warmth. A child of Nurgle. Typhon had allowed it aboard. He did not resist when its essence slid through the cracks of reality. He welcomed it like a long-awaited friend. For decades, he had carried a seed of corruption inside him now. The demon came to awaken its full blooming. The Death Guard did not understand what was happening at first. They thought the sickness that spread across the ship was just a byproduct of the warp storm, a common hazard. But this was no ordinary plague. This was the plague of unbelief, a disease crafted by Nurgle for a single purpose, to break the Death Guard's bodies, will, and souls until they had no choice but to accept his gift. It began slowly. A cough, a fever, a blister beneath the armor. Marines hardened by centuries of war dismissed it. But the sickness grew fast. Their skin split. Organs rotted. Black pus dripped down their throats. Their armor fused to their flesh, turning their bodies into prisons of rusted metal and bloated tissue. They tried to purge the infection with Medicae rites, chemical baths, and even fire, but nothing worked. The plague laughed at every remedy. Typhon watched it all with cold, Satisfaction. He walked among the dying like a shepherd tending a flock. His presence brought no comfort, only dread. Strangely, he alone remained untouched, moving through infected corridors without even a cough. Some of the warriors stared at him with desperate suspicion. Others prayed silently that he would lead them out of this nightmare, but Typhon offered no salvation. He was their doom made flesh. The sickness worsened. Marines collapsed in pools of their own decay. Their lungs liquefied. Their hearts slowed until they barely beat. Astartes beings engineered to survive the impossible began to die in droves. Some clawed at their armor, trying to tear it off as it welded itself into their rotten skin. Others laid down quietly, whispering prayers that faded into delirious laughter. And Mortarion, the Primarch who had survived the poisoned peaks of Barbarus, finally felt fear. He staggered through his flagship, watching his sons crumble around him. He tried to resist the plague with sheer will, with hatred, with endurance, but this was not poison he could conquer. This was not a sickness he could adapt to. This was divine corruption, and even a Primarch could not stand against a god's gift. Mortarion collapsed to his knees, gasping, his massive frame shaking with illness. For the first time since childhood, he felt the helplessness of a dying man on Barbarus, suffocating beneath toxic fog. He cursed the Emperor, cursed Horus, cursed Typhon, cursed fate, but his voice was weak, choked by rot. He looked to Typhon for answers, for guidance, for hope. Typhon only stared back, silent and calm, his eyes glowing with a cold, triumphant wisdom. Mortarion saw the truth too late. The plague was not an accident. The warp storm was not misfortune. Their doom was not destiny. It was betrayal. Typhon had orchestrated everything, the removal of the navigators, their path into the storm, the demon's arrival, the infection tearing the legion apart. Mortarion tried to rise, but his legs buckled. His strength, the strength he had built through a lifetime of pain, abandoned him. He demanded to know why. Typhon finally spoke softly, lovingly, like a son revealing a long-kept secret. This was always your fate, my lord. Nurgle has waited for you. For all of us. Mortarion's roar of rage turned into a whettling cough. As the Primarch's vision darkened, the warp trembled. The sickly green glow of Nurgle's realm bled into reality. The Death Guard screamed not in battle, but in transformation. Their bodies swelled, bursting with disease. Their veins blackened, their bones twisted. Their skin hardened into rotting leather. They became immortal through corruption, undying carriers of plague. Each Marine became a vessel for sickness, their souls shackled to Nurgle's eternal embrace. The Death Guard were reborn, and at their center stood Typhon. His transformation was the most terrible of all. The demon he had welcomed now merged with him fully, cracking open the shell of humanity he still wore. His skin split open as a living swarm of demonic insects poured out billions of tiny creatures, each a fragment of the Destroyer Hive that would become his eternal companion. They crawled into his armor, through his flesh, into his lungs, his veins, his mind, and he embraced them. He accepted their gifts. He laughed softly, warmly, like a man being reunited with his true family. Cullathine died in that moment. What rose in his place was Typhus, herald of Nurgle, the host of the Destroyer Hive, the walking plague. His voice became deeper, fouler, filled with buzzing undertones of the innumerable demons now living inside him. His presence alone caused metal to rust and air to thicken with decay. Mortarion, now a broken shell of his former self, stared at Typhus with something close to horror, but he could not deny the truth. He had lost his legion. He had lost his sons. He had lost his destiny. And the first betrayal had not come from Horus, nor the Emperor, nor Chaos. It had come from the boy he raised from the poison of Barbarus, the boy who had always belonged to Nurgle. Typhus stood among the dying and newly born Death Guard, lifting his scythe not in defiance, but in worship. The plague had done its work. The Legion was reborn. And Typhus, once the first captain, had become the first and greatest herald of decay. The Death Guard would never be the same again, and neither would the galaxy. When the plague of unbelief finally completed its work and the Death Guard gasped their last mortal breaths, something very different happened inside Typhon. His transformation was not simply physical decay, not just the rotting of flesh and the warping of soul that claimed the rest of the Legion. No, Typhon had been chosen for something far more intimate, something far more horrifying, something only Nurgle's truest son could endure. Deep inside his corrupted flesh, beneath armor fused to bone and veins filled with blackened ichor, a new life began to form. Or rather, many new lives. A swarm. A hive. A living colony of demonic organisms born from Nurgle's own essence. They were tiny at first, microscopic fragments of plague demons, each no larger than a grain of dust, but together they formed a monstrous intelligence. A swarm that breathed with him, pulsed with him, whispered to him. This was the birth of the Destroyer Hive. It started as a tingling beneath Typhon's skin, like thousands of crawling insects moving through the tunnels of his veins. Soon, that sensation grew into a constant vibration, an army of microscopic demons writhing inside him. They weren't parasites. They weren't infection. They were family. They were his children. Each one piece of Nurgle's love, a living curse crafted from disease, rust, and hatred. The hive fed on Typhon's body, but also sustained it. His flesh became both womb and fortress, breeding ground and battlefield. The demons inside him multiplied endlessly, splitting, budding, and birthing new horrors at a rate no mortal biology could understand. Billions of them surged through him at any moment. Like a plague storm trapped in a man-shaped shell, they crawled through his bones, clung to his organs, swam through pus-filled cavities, and nested beneath his armor. Some formed clusters beneath his ribcage, glowing with sickly green light. Others gathered near his throat, causing the deep buzzing undertone in his voice. Some perched on his spine like whispering spirits. A few even carved burrows through his arms and legs, waiting to pour out at the first sign of battle. This hive was not chaotic. It was organized, intelligent, a single will formed from billions of demonic instincts, all connected through Typhus. He commanded them like a living organ. They obeyed him like loyal soldiers. Here is how the hive worked. When Typhus inhaled, the swarm grew stronger, feeding on the warp-tainted air. When Typhus exhaled, the hive spread outward, riding on mist, on rot, on breath itself. When his heart beat, they felt it. When his anger rose, they boiled. When his scythe swung, they surged. The hive was not a weapon Typhus carried. It was Typhus. And it was this terrifying unity that earned him the title, the Walking Plague. Other champions of chaos wielded weapons forged in hell forges, artifacts dripping with sorcery or demonic force. But Typhus's greatest weapon was his very existence. Wherever he walked, disease followed. Wherever he stood, life rotted. Wherever he breathed, death multiplied. He was not a man carrying plague, he was plague made flesh. When the hive erupted, it was a sight that broke even veteran space marines. Armor rusted instantly. Flesh liquefied. Eyes melted like wax. Air turned thick with buzzing death. Chain blades jammed when the swarm swarmed into their gears. Bolter rounds detonated in the barrels. Even Astartes' lungs designed to survive toxins that killed whole. Cities collapsed under the weight of demonic rot. There are countless battlefield examples of Typhus unleashing the hive. But a few stand above the rest. On the world of Earthrax, a loyalist company of ultramarines intercepted Typhus's warband. They believed discipline and purity would protect them from the filth of Nurgle. Typhus stepped onto the battlefield without speaking a word. The ultramarines advanced confidently. until the first wave of the hive poured out of the vents in his armor. It looked like dust at first, then smoke, then a black cloud that howled with tiny, shrieking voices. Within minutes, entire squads collapsed, their bodies bloated and twitching as the swarm burrowed into their flesh. During the siege of Hydra Pax, Imperial Guard regiments deployed gas masks, chemical suits, and flame weaponry. Typhus laughed a deep, buzzing, wet laugh and released the hive. The swarms slipped under masks, crawled into ears, nested beneath sealed armor, and turned whole regiments into shambling corpses in under an hour. At the fall of Station Cascadar, Skittery troops attempted to purge him with high-energy radiation. Instead of dying, the hive fed on the radiation, mutating into glowing demonic motes that swarmed the station like radioactive flies. Even the machine priests screamed as rust devoured their bionics and mold ate through their sacred circuitry. Wherever Typhus walked, ecosystems died. Crops wilted in seconds. Rivers turned into sludge. Animals laid down and never rose again. Even the soil rotted beneath his feet. Entire planets have fallen to ruin simply because he stayed too long on their surface. And through all of this destruction, Typhus remained calm, almost serene. He did not revel like a berserker. He did not laugh like a demon. He moved with the quiet patience of a plague spreading through a body, slow, inevitable, unstoppable. The hive was not merely a gift. It was a crown of rot, a crown of decay, a crown that marked Typhus as Nurgle's chosen, not just a servant, but an extension of the plague god's will. He was no longer a warrior carrying death. He was death that walked, breathed, and whispered with a billion tiny voices. In the end, Typhus's body is not a prison for the hive. It is their cathedral, their sanctuary, their holy vessel. And as long as Typhus lives, the Destroyer Hive lives with him, endlessly growing, endlessly spreading, endlessly remembering the moment they were born inside the flesh of Nurgle's most beloved son. Typhus's powers are not the kind that burst outward in golden light or crackle with psychic electricity like the librarians of the Imperium. His abilities are quiet, creeping, inevitable like the slow spread of decay across a forgotten corpse. Where others wield power like a weapon, Typhus wields it like a disease, silently, patiently, and with absolute certainty that sooner or later, everything will fall to rot. His strength, even before corruption, was legendary. As a first captain of the Death Guard, he was already a physical force capable of breaking Xeno's warlords with a single blow. But after his transformation, his strength no longer came from muscle or bone. It came from the plague that lived inside him. His very flesh had become a fusion of swollen infection and corrupted biomass. His muscles were reinforced by layers of hardened, leathery tissue swollen with warp energy. Every swing of his scythe carried not only brute power, but the weight of 1,000 diseases yearning to spill across the battlefield. Yet brute strength was only one fragment of him. Inside Typhus, the Destroyer Hive hummed constantly, billions of microscopic demons swirling through his veins, feeding on warp-tainted blood, knitting his wounds from within, and mutating him in ways no living organism should survive. Injuries that would kill even other Chaos Marines simply became nourishment for the hive. A blade that cuts him opens only long enough for the swarm to crawl out, hissing before the wound seals with a layer of living rot. Flamers scorch him, but the heat only makes the demons faster, hungrier. Plasma burns away chunks of his armor, yet beneath it lies not exposed flesh but churning, pulsing colonies of plague organisms, ready to burst forth. His endurance is legendary even among the Death Guard. Typhus can continue, fighting after losing limbs, after being shot through the chest, after suffering blows that should tear a man in half. Pain means nothing to him. Suffering is merely a language he has long since mastered. Every attack only makes him stronger. Every injury only gives the hive more material to reshape. but perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Typhus's power is his mastery of Nurgle's psychic gifts. He is not a psyker like the sorcerers of Tzeentch, whose minds spark with chaotic brilliance and forbidden knowledge. Typhus wields psychic power the way a corpse yields to decay. Slowly, naturally, horrifyingly. His spells do not look like traditional sorcery. They manifest as clouds of rot, waves of corruption. Bursts of pestilent energy that eat through armor and flesh alike. He calls forth plagues that move like living creatures, swarms of spectral flies that devour souls. Waves of unnatural fever that boil blood inside armor. Or clouds of choking fog that blind even machines. His psychic aura is toxic. Standing near him is like drowning in a swamp of infection. Even experienced psykers feel sick in his presence, their visions clouding, their minds weakening as the buzzing of the hive crawls into their thoughts. His iconic weapon, the Man Reaper, is more than just a scythe. It is a symbol of Nurgle's harvest, a massive corroded blade crackling with warplight. When Typhus swings it, reality seems to bend, as if the air itself recoils from its foul edge. The weapon slices not only flesh but spirit, leaving wounds that drip not blood but disease. Armor rusts upon contact. Bones soften. Life shudders, and behind all these powers lies the true heart of Typhus's terror. He cannot be escaped, unlike berserkers who chase their prey or sorcerers who scheme from afar. Typhus advances at a relentless, steady pace. He does not run. He does not rush. He walks calm, steady, unstoppable. Enemies flee before him, but they cannot outrun the plague. They hide behind walls, but the swarm slithers under the doors. They seal themselves in bunkers, but the rot eats through metal. They retreat into the void, but the sickness rides with them. He is inevitability given form. There are countless reports of defenders who held strong lines, trenches, fortresses, war machines, only to find their warriors collapsing hours later, their lungs filled with buzzing parasites, their armor welded to their skin, their organs dissolving into slime. They realized too late that they were not fighting a single warrior. They were fighting a living apocalypse. Other champions of chaos revel in destruction. Typhus does not revel. He simply is. He brings decay not with joy or rage, but with calm acceptance. As though he is fulfilling a natural order the galaxy refuses to acknowledge. In the end, Typhus's powers do not make him a monster, they make him a force of nature. A tide of rot. A storm of sickness. A promise that all things flesh, metal, spirit must one day fall apart, and Typhus is simply there to make sure that day comes sooner. Across the war-torn galaxy of the 41st millennium, Typhus moves like a shadow that leaves devastation in its wake. He is not a frontline warlord seeking glory, nor a general who cares for the politics of chaos. Typhus's purpose is far simpler, far older, far more terrifying: to spread Nurgle's gifts to every corner of existence. Wherever he goes, new plague worlds bloom like rotten flowers. Systems collapse beneath waves of sickness, and imperial defenses crumble, not from bombs or bolters, but from the quiet, suffocating certainty of decay. After the heresy, when the Death Guard retreated into the Eye of Terror, Typhus was already no longer Mortarion's servant. He was his own force, his own master, guided only by Nurgle's will. Mortarion may rule the plague planet, but Typhus does not kneel. He marches across the galaxy with his own fleets, his own cults, his own plague hordes. They call him the Herald of Nurgle, not because he spreads the god's word, but because his arrival alone is a prophecy of ruin. His flagship, the Terminus Est, is a floating mausoleum, half ship, half corpse, crawling with plague flies and rusted cannons that drip with foul ichor. Wherever it appears, Imperial commanders know that no quarantine will be enough. No prayer will be heard. No evacuation will be fast enough to outrun the sickness that follows in its wake. Typhus has personally infected dozens of Imperial worlds. each etched into history as a testament to unstoppable decay, once one of the most fertile planets in Ultramar's domain, transformed into a realm of weeping sores and rotting forests. The proud defenders fought valiantly, but when Typhus stepped onto the planet, its fate was sealed. Fields turned black. Rivers became sludge. Entire cities collapsed into pits of bubbling corruption, one of the largest conflicts of the modern age, where Typhus led wave after wave of Nurgle's children against Robut Guilliman's reborn Imperium. While Mortarion fought Guilliman directly, Typhus unleashed plagues that even Primarch-led armies struggled to contain. He infected supply chains, poisoned food reserves, and turned refugees into shuffling plague zombies that overran entire districts. Where a single day's presence of Typhus led to the collapse of a multi-level fortress hive. They sealed the gates, deployed chemical purifiers, even opened fire on their own infected citizens, but the rot spread faster than flame. Within hours, the defenses had dissolved into soft, bubbling mush. In each of these battles, Typhus operated with a cold, disciplined focus. Unlike many Chaos champions drunk on madness, he plans his spread like a farmer sowing seeds. He knows exactly where to infect, how long a plague will incubate, when to release the hive, and when to pull back to allow despair to take hold. He understands that fear is a form of infection. Panic is a carrier. Desperation is the soil where plagues grow fastest. Typhus's reach extends beyond planets as well. Star systems have died from his passing without a single shot fired. He corrupts life support systems on void stations. He infects agri-world harvests with spores that lie dormant until winter. He releases microscopic demons into water supplies that turn entire populations into rotting husks overnight. He even targets astropaths and navigators, warping their psychic senses with visions of disease that spread like a mental plague. To the Imperium, Typhus is not just a warlord. He is an existential threat. Armies can be repelled. Fleets can be destroyed. Demon invasions can be purged. But how do you stop a sickness that has no single source? How do you kill something that is already inside you? This is why the Imperium fears Typhus more than they fear many demon princes. He does not rely on the instability of the warp to sustain himself. He does not vanish when the tides of chaos weaken. Typhus is sustained by life itself, by its inevitable decay. As long as living things age, rot, or fall ill, Typhus will have power. Even within the Death Guard, Typhus holds a unique place. Some see him as a prophet. Others see him as the rightful leader. Many fear him, even among his plague-ridden brothers. For Mortarion may command loyalty, but Typhus commands inevitability. There are whispers that one day he may even turn against Mortarion if the plague god wills it. For Typhus recognizes no authority except Nurgle's. Across the centuries, Typhus has become not just a character in the galaxy, but a myth. The walking plague, the host of the hive, the death that marshers. Children in hive cities whisper his name when disease breaks out. Imperial officers invoke him as a curse when plagues spread through their ranks. And when his shadow falls upon a world, the people know that even if they cannot see him, the sickness has already begun. Because Typhus does not bring war. He brings the end of resistance. The quiet surrender of life to decay. The slow collapse of everything that once dared to stand tall. And wherever he goes in the 41st millennium, one truth follows. Nothing leaves untouched. And nothing survives unchanged. Typhus is a creature shaped not only by plague and war, but by an inner philosophy twisted by decades of corruption, resentment, and an unwavering belief that decay is the ultimate truth of the universe. To understand him is to understand a being who no longer thinks like a mortal, or even like a space marine. His identity is fused with the certainty that all things great empires, proud heroes, shining civilizations must eventually rot. In Typhus's mind, this is not cruelty. It is simply the natural order of existence. He sees himself not as a monster, but as a guide. A shepherd leading all things to the inevitable peace of decay. Long before his fall, Typhon was already a quiet thinker, a man who observed more than he spoke. That calm, introspective nature did not fade when he became Typhus, it deepened. He does not rage like Angron, nor scheme like Fulgrim, nor revel like the champions of Slaanesh. Typhus carries himself with an eerie serenity, a patience born of Nurgle's teachings. He understands that everything breaks eventually, so there is no need for haste. A plague does not rush. Rot does not hurry. It spreads when the time is right. In his silence, in his deliberate steps, lies a terrifying truth. He believes he is helping the galaxy, liberating it from the suffering of striving, resisting, and hoping. Mortar believes strength lies in endurance. Typhus believes strength lies in acceptance, specifically, acceptance of inevitable decay. This fundamental difference is what eventually placed the two on opposite ends of philosophy, even though they still serve the same god. Mortarion fights because he hates oppression. Typhus spreads plague because he believes resistance itself is the greatest lie the galaxy has ever told. The moment you are born, he believes, you begin to fall apart. Typhus simply hastens that truth. His personality reflects this worldview. He is rarely emotional, rarely loud, rarely reactive. He speaks slowly, in a deep, resonant tone that feels less like conversation and more like prophecy. Even his threats are delivered with an unsettling calm, as though he is stating facts rather than promising violence. Where other warlords bark orders, Typhus simply moves and armies follow. Where others boast of glory, Typhus allows silence to speak for him. The buzzing of the hive beneath his armor fills the quiet spaces between his words, creating an atmosphere that unnerves even the most battle-hardened warriors. Typhus's hatred for the Emperor also plays a significant role in his character. To him, the Emperor represents a lie, the lie of perfect order, perfect control, perfect purity. Typhus despises these ideals because he sees them as chains wrapped around humanity's throat. The Emperor demands compliance, obedience, and rigidity. Nurgle offers comfort, release, and a strange kind of affection. Typhus sees himself as an agent of freedom, twisted, horrifying freedom, but freedom nonetheless. Every plague he spreads, every world he corrupts, is a blow against what he considers the false promise of imperial perfection. There is also a deep bitterness buried in Typhus's soul, a bitterness rooted in his early life on Barbarus. He was a child who heard whispers of a god who cared for him in ways Mortarion never could. He was a young warrior who felt overlooked, overshadowed by a primarch who demanded strength, but offered no warmth. Even after becoming first captain, even after earning vast respect, Typhus felt he had never been truly seen. Nurgle, in contrast, embraced him completely, body, mind, and soul. This affection twisted into devotion, and that devotion into zeal. Typhus believes Nurgle understands him in a way no mortal or primarch ever did. This belief makes him incredibly dangerous, because his loyalty is absolute. There is no doubt in his mind, no conflict, no hesitation. He sees himself as a chosen instrument of inevitability. Just as death claims the rich and poor alike, Typhus seeks to claim all beings under the same universal truth. His philosophy is the death of ambition, the end of hope, the quiet acceptance of decay as a gift rather than a curse. And because he is patient, he is never frustrated by resistance. When armies fight back, Typhus simply advances at the same steady pace. When defenses hold firm, he waits. When his enemies flee, he knows they are only delaying what must happen. His mind works not in days or years, but in eras. He thinks like a god's servant, not a mortal strategist. Among the plague marines, Typhus commands fear and reverence in equal measure. They see him as the purest embodiment of their god's teachings. Some even whisper that Typhus is closer to Nurgle than Mortarion himself, because Mortarion still clings to pride and old wounds, while Typhus has surrendered everything to decay. In the end, Typhus is defined by one terrifying truth: he has no doubts, no guilt, no hesitation, no fear. He is certain the galaxy must rot. He is certain he is the one chosen to deliver that rot. And the calmness with which he carries this belief makes him one of the most frightening beings to ever walk the stars. His clashes with the Grey Knights are legendary. These warriors of psychic purity, clad in silver and protected by wards of faith, should theoretically be immune to his corruption. But Typhus has slain even them. Their armor resists his plague for moments longer than others, yet even they cannot escape the inevitability of his presence. They face him with courage, but courage is not immunity. Typhus respects them more than most opponents. But respect does not spare them. Perhaps the most interesting comparisons arise when Typhus is set against other disease-bearers of the galaxy, like the Genestealer's hive sickness, the biological horrors of the Tyranids, or the technoplagues of the Dark Mechanicum. But while these beings create mindless, instinctual destruction, Typhus spreads decay with purpose, intention, and philosophical conviction. The Tyranids devour. Typhus corrupts. The Mechanicum infects machines. Typhus infects the soul. In the end, Typhus stands alone because he follows a purpose purer than ambition. He does not fight to win battles or claim territory. He does not seek power, recognition, or ascension. His rivalry with others is never personal. It is simply a matter of inevitability. Every opponent, primarch, demon, champion, or empire, faces the same fate in his eyes. They will all, eventually, fall apart, and Typhus will be there, walking slowly toward them, carrying the quiet truth they fear the most, that decay does not discriminate. And no one, not even gods, can escape the inevitable rot he brings. Typhus does not seek rivalry, yet the galaxy forces him into conflict with some of its greatest figures. Unlike other champions of chaos who compete for favor, Typhus rarely concerns himself with politics or status. His comparisons with others arise naturally, because few beings embody their patron god as perfectly as he does. Wherever he walks, legends are tested, loyalties are strained. And even gods take notice that his relationship with Mortarion is one of the most tragic and twisted. In the history of the Death Guard, Mortarion sees himself as the father of the Legion, the liberator of Barbarus, the one who dragged his sons out of a world of poison and misery. But Typhus remembers that world differently. To Typhus, Barbarus was not a prison, it was a cradle. He thrived in its toxic fogs, felt comfort in its sickness, and heard whispers of a god who loved him long before Mortarion ever found him. So when Mortarion tries to command him, Typhus obeys only when their goals align. And when they don't, Typhus does not hesitate to undermine him. Their conflict is rarely open and violent. It's quieter, two philosophies grinding against each other. Mortarion wants to destroy oppression. Typhus wants to destroy resistance itself. Mortarion leads an army. Typhus leads inevitability. Against the Imperium, Typhus stands as a shadow that even primarchs fear. Guilliman has gone to war against plague armies countless times, and the Lord Commander understands something few others do. Typhus cannot be defeated with strategy or overwhelming force. He cannot be outmaneuvered or outflanked. Typhus is not a general in the traditional sense. He is a spreading force. Guilliman admitted once that while Mortarion wages war on the front lines, it is Typhus who ensures the battle never truly ends. Guilliman can fight Mortarion blade to blade, but Typhus fights him in the air, the soil, the water systems, the refugees, the wounded, the food supply. Typhus's rivalry with Guilliman is one of ideology, order against decay, hope against quiet surrender. Even among chaos, Typhus stands apart. Champions of Khorne charge into battle with fury, yet even they hesitate to fight Typhus up close. What honor is there in killing a man who explodes into diseases? What victory is there in winning, only to die coughing black fluid minutes later? To Khorne's warriors, Typhus is an insult to the purity of combat. To Typhus, they are simply carriers waiting to be opened. Sorcerers of Tzeentch despise him because his very presence disrupts their delicate spells, warping their visions with buzzing whispers from the Destroyer Hive. Demon princes see him as a rival, because he does not seek the apotheosis they crave. Typhus does not need to become a demon prince. His power is already perfect for what he was created to do. In the end, the story of Typhus is not simply the story of a traitor, or a champion, or even a monster. It is the story of a slow, creeping destiny fulfilled, not with thunder and fire, but with the quiet certainty of decay. From the poisoned fogs of Barbarus to the rotting halls of the Terminus Est, Typhus walked a path that was never truly his own doing. It was shaped long before he swung his first scythe, whispered into his mind when he was still a child struggling to breathe on a dying world. Everything he became first captain. Betrayer, herald of Nurgle, was a piece of a puzzle he had been born into. Yet there is something chilling about how willingly he embraced it. While others fell to chaos through desperation, corruption, or manipulation, Typhus stepped into Nurgle's arms as though returning home. His transformation was not the shattering of a man, it was the completion of one. Now, wherever he goes in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, worlds tremble not because a warrior approaches, but because a plague is coming. His presence alone is a death sentence. Entire planets fall silent after his passing, their cities reduced to rusted skeletons, their people twisted into shambling mockeries of life. Typhus does not need glory, does not need praise, does not even need victory. For him, the spreading of rot is victory enough, and that is what makes him truly terrifying. He is not driven by rage. He is not fueled by ambition. He does not seek conquest or dominion. He spreads decay because he believes the galaxy is meant to fall apart. Because he believes resistance is a lie. Because he believes suffering ends only when struggle ends, and that Nurgle's embrace is the final peace everything deserves. Mortarion fights out of hatred. Horus fell out of pride. The traitor legions act from anger, desperation, or glory. But Typhus acts out of certainty. Absolute, unbreakable certainty. That quiet conviction has carried him through the centuries, leaving a trail of ruined worlds and broken armies behind him. And as the Imperium fights desperately to survive another millennium, one truth remains. Typhus is still out there, walking slowly, patiently, inevitably. A scythe in his hand, a hive in his veins, and a god's laughter echoing softly behind each step he takes. The walking plague will never stop, because decay never stops.